This is the test review for Unit 1, and we've broken this into objectives, and the first objective we're going to look at is to translate algebraic and verbal expression. So algebraic expressions are ones like this, where you can see the variables written down, the x's and the y's and the letters. And the verbal expressions is more how you would say those things. So it's often written out in letters and words so you can see what's actually happening there. So before we actually even start this, we're going to talk about some of the key words that we need to know for this section. So sum refers to when you're adding two things together. Difference refers to when you're subtracting two things. Product is when you're multiplying two things together. And quotient is when you're dividing two things together. Now also when we do this for algebra, when we are multiplying things together, we often don't put the multiplication symbol. Sometimes we also use the dot notation. And also for a quotient, rather than putting the divide symbol, we could use the over symbol, or we could actually just write it as a fraction as well. So we've got a couple of different ways for doing this. So when we see a question like this, write an algebraic expression. First of all, I'm looking for the key word in this question, which is quotient. So I know this is divide by 4 and a number. So the number, we're going to use a variable to represent it because we don't know what it is. We could use x. I'm going to go ahead and just use n for number for this one, but 4 over x would be perfectly okay. Notice I didn't use the divide symbol. That is correct, but more likely for the SOL, they're going to write it as a fraction if they give you that question. Next question, twice. That means we're going to multiply something by 2, or double it. Now, what are we going to double? The sum of a number cubed. Now I know sum means add. A number cubed, I know, is n cubed. And also we're going to add the square root of 3. And I want to times all of this by 2. So I don't just want to put 2 times this, because then order of operations, I would only multiply these first two things together. I want to multiply all of this by 2. So to show that, I'm going to put parentheses around it, and then I'm going to put a 2 next to it at the start. So 2 times, we're going to multiply everything by 2, so that's why I have the parentheses around it one more time. 6 less. This is one we're going to be very careful of. Less, we know, is another word that means subtract, but we've got to be careful, we're not going to write just down 6 minus. 6 less than actually means you're going to subtract 6 at the end. So if I said 6 less than 10, I'm hoping you'd say 4, because you actually do 10 minus 6. So 6 less means I'm actually going to put minus 6 at the end of my question. I now see product, so I know that means a multiplication, so I could use the dot for this. 5 and a number. I'm going to pick n again for number as my variable, so the answer is 5 times n minus 6. Now even better, rather than putting 5 dot n, I could just go ahead and put 5n. When two things are next to each other in algebra, it means that we're going to multiply those two things. Now in 4, we're going to do the reverse of that. So first of all, we're going to recognize some symbols. The 2 lines are going to refer to the absolute value. So the absolute value of... Now I have 2 things inside the absolute value, so I want to make sure I do the absolute value of both of them. So I'm going to use the key word that relates to this question. So for subtract, that's difference. So the absolute value of the difference of... And then I can go ahead and say what the 2 things actually are. So I've got 4 times a number cubed, I could use of the product of 4 and a number cubed. And then the other term is 1, so. And then that makes sure, by using the word difference, that I make sure I'm doing the absolute value of both of those 2 expressions. And then at the end, I'm going to put subtract a number doubled. Now actually for this one, notice 1 is x and 1 is y. So rather than just putting subtract a number, I'm going to put subtract a different number times 2. Now I should really write times 2 in words, so times 2. You could also put subtract another number doubled. You could also put subtract twice another number. So there's quite a few different ways you can write these answers, but make sure you use different letters for the different, put a different number if we have different letters for this question. Also on here, probably we should write out the numbers as well. So I wrote out 4. You should really write F-O-U-R. Notice it does that in these questions up here. It says 6 as spelt out in letters, and 3 it's also spelt out in letters. So you should really do the same for that question as well. Question 5. And then the line means divide, so I'm going to put quotient for this one. So I know that's the key word for divide. They're two different letters, so I'm going to put the quotient of a number and a different number. Also, I'm using the symbol for number. You should really write out number as well. And then at the end of the question, it says we're going to add 3. So just put add 3. And I will put it in letters this time to show you what it's supposed to look like. Error analysis. Describe and correct the problem error in the problem below. A student writes the quotient of 5 and x to describe the algebraic expression x over 5. Now, I recognise the word quotient means divide, and I also know that symbol on the fraction also means divide, so that's a good start. This one has 5 and x, which means 5 goes on the top and x goes on the bottom, whereas we can see it's actually the other way around on this question. So we need to describe what happens, so we could say that they're the wrong way around. But it also asks you to correct the error as well. So make sure that you put that it should be 5 over x, like that, or you could put it like that, but I think those two are the better ones to write it as a fraction. Last question. Mr. Utterback sells P pencils at 50 cents. So however many pencils we buy, if it was like 2 pencils we bought, we'd want to do 2 times 50. So I want to do P times 50. And remember when we do that, we put numbers first and letters second. He buys 10 sheets of paper, and it says S is the number of sheets. So if it was like 3 sheets of paper, you do 3 times 10, 30 cents. So if it's S sheets, you're going to do S times 10. And once again, you want to put numbers first and letters second. And then the total cost is if you add the two things together. So that would be the expression for this one. We don't need the dot symbol there again, so we can just go ahead and put 50p, and we can do the same thing, and we can put 10s. Now, just to mention about the vocabulary used here, expression is something that doesn't have an equal sign. If it said something like write an equation, then I could add an equal sign. Perhaps I could put like the variable c. C for cost, or I could have like m equals, m for money, and that would work for this question. Now also for this question, with this being in cents, I went with 50 cents for this one. You could change the question into dollars if you really wanted to. 0.50 or 0.5p, and then 10 cents, 0.10 or just 0.1. And that would put the price in dollars if you really wanted to do that. So just make sure you're paying attention to units when you're doing questions like that too. So we're moving on to the next section. We're looking at simplifying numerical expressions involving exponents and rational numbers. And it also says show your steps and work. So in other words, we can't just type this straight into the calculator. We have to work out what's actually going on here. So if you're squaring a number, that means you're just timesing it by itself. And then 2 negatives make a positive, and 3 times 3 would equal 9. Now if we're doing the second question, order of operations, I'm going to do my exponent before I do my subtraction. So I would work out 3 squared, which is 9, and then give it a negative. Be very careful in those two questions. A lot of people put negative 9 for both of those answers. So make sure you know the difference between those. Now on C, I see some grouping symbols here, so I'm going to work out what's inside the grouping symbols. Negative 6 take away 5 is negative 11. Now the two lines are absolute value, which makes anything that's negative positive. So this negative 11 is actually going to become positive 11. The negative is just from the original part of the question, so my answer is just negative 11. When I move on to part D, I have 2 sets of grouping symbols here, so I'm going to work those out first. So within the grouping symbol, I got 3 minus 7, which is negative 4. And the square root of 36 is 6. Which number times by itself gives you 36 is how you work that out. So obviously 6 times 6. Once again, I have the absolute value, so anything that's negative is going to become positive. And then I'm going to work out what is 4 take away 6. Negative 2. When I get to E, I can see I've got a subtraction. The dot I know is multiplication, and I've got addition. And I know from PEMDAS, multiplication comes before all those. So I'm going to work out the 4 times 2 first, which is 8. And then addition and subtraction we do at the same time and go left to right. So it's not just we do addition first and then subtraction. We do them at the same time. So 8 take away 8 is 0. And then 0 plus 6 is 6. So our answer for that question is 6. Now when I get to F, I've actually got 3 grouping symbols on this question. I actually have absolute value. I have a square root. and I also have the parentheses. So I'm going to work inwards and then start working outwards. So I'm going to start in the middle first. So 4 plus 3, I can see, is 7. And I know I have to square it. So 7 squared, that's 49. Now I'm going to do the square root of 49, which is 7. And then the absolute value of 7 is just 7. It doesn't change it from positive to negative. It only makes things that are negative positive. So this is just 7 take away 7. And therefore the answer for that would be 0. Now when I get to G, I have a fraction question. So I want to work out the numerator as one question and the denominator as a second question, and then divide the two answers, because that's what the line means here. So when I look at the top here, I see my parentheses. So I'm going to work on that part first. Within the parentheses, I have addition and division. Division comes first on this one. So I'm going to do 4 divided by 2, which is 2. And then I can do my addition. So 2 add 2 is 4. And then I can do my exponent, which is 4 squared. So 4 squared is 16. And that's the top part of my answer. Now on this one here, also I have parentheses again. So if I work out what's inside the parentheses, I see exponents first. 1 squared being 1. And then 3 take away 1 is 2. When I come to this part, what am I going to work out first? Well, I'm going to work out the exponent first. So 2 cubed is 8. So that gives me negative 8 divided by 2. And if I do negative 8 divided by 2, I get negative 4. And if I work that out, I get 4.
Dial extension 4200.
So if we finish that one off, we end up with 4, and you can see quite a long question, so make sure you show your steps on questions like that. When I get to H, I can see my grouping symbols again. I can see other grouping symbols inside those grouping symbols, so they're the ones that I want to work on first. So negative 3 squared, that was one of the questions we actually had earlier. Remember, that one's negative 9, because we do the squaring first and then make it negative. And then once I work that grouping symbols out, then I work outwards and work on this grouping symbol. So 5 add negative 9 is negative 4. The absolute value of negative 4 is positive 4, because it makes everything positive. And two things that are next to each other in algebra, remember, is we're going to multiply, so that would come before subtract. So 2 times 4 is 8, and then I've got to take away 12, and then 8 take away 12 is negative 4. So you just need to be very careful when you're doing that type of question, that you make sure you follow the exact order. Next section we're going to do the same thing, but this time we're going to substitute values in. The big thing for this is, when you substitute a value in, you should really put it in parentheses. Particularly if you're going to do these questions on the calculator, just to make sure you avoid any mistakes. So inside this grouping symbol, I can see I've got an exponent, so I definitely want to work on that first. So negative 2 squared is positive 4. Now I have two things that are next to each other in here, which is multiplication, so I also want to do that as well. 5 times 4 is 20. Then I can get to my subtraction, so 6 take away 20 is negative 4. And the absolute value of negative 4 is 4, because it takes anything negative and makes it positive. Now notice when you're doing your absolute value questions, be very careful, because if you do the absolute value sign too small, this might actually just look like 16 take away 20. So you might want to extend this line a little bit, or possibly even make this line thicker, just so you realise that it is an absolute value and not just a number 1. Part B, and I'm going to erase this answer now so we have a little bit more room. Same thing, as I substitute in, I'm going to put it in parentheses, just to avoid any possible mistakes. All I'm doing is taking the numbers from up here. And I'm going to do, this is my grouping symbol, so I'm going to work on this first. Within my grouping symbol, I have things that are next to each other, which I know is multiply, so I'm going to multiply those things. On this one here, I could do 3 times 1 times negative 2. I'm actually going to do negative 3 times 1 times negative 2, which is positive 6. And that will actually save me a step in this question. Negative 8 plus 6 is negative 2. The absolute value of negative 2 becomes positive 2. So my answer is negative 2, because there's a negative in front of the absolute value. What you definitely don't want to do on this question is say 2 negatives make a positive and end up with just 2. That would be a very bad mistake for this question. When we get to C, I'm going to substitute in again. So B is negative 2. 4 times by 1. Once again, putting it in parentheses. I have grouping symbols, so I'm going to work that out first. These two things are next to each other, which means multiply. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. and 4 times 1 is also 4. As it's inside a grouping symbol, that's why I worked that one out first, part of my GEMDAS. Then I can work out this thing here. The absolute value of 4 is just 4, because it stays positive. And the square root of 4 is 2, because 2 times 2 is 4. And then when I add those two things together, I should end up with 6. When we get down to the questions near the end, oops, we're going to plug in those same numbers. So I've said that A was 1, and it also said, if I scroll back, that C was 4. So I'm going to work on this part first, because this is my division. When I do my division, I work out the top of the fraction first, which is 3, and I work out my bottom of my fraction. And then now I can do my adding. So 3/5 add 4 is just going to be 4 3/5. You can change 3/5 to a decimal if you like. 3 divided by 5 is 0.6, add 4 is 4.6. So either of those answers would be perfectly correct. You could also change this into a mixed number as well. From a mixed number into an improper fraction if you wish. And how you do that is 5 times 4 is 20, add on the 3 is 23. So 23 over 5 is another acceptable answer. Okay, let's look back what B is. B is negative 2, so I got negative 2 plus C, it says is positive 4, divided by the negative of negative 2. So when I add these two things together, I'm going to get positive 2. And the two negatives here are also going to give me that positive. And then when I divide these two things, I'm just going to end up with 1. When I get to F, A it said was 1, C it said was 4, and 3. So when we have our fractions like this, we can just go ahead and multiply all the things that are on the top of the fraction here. So 1 times 2 times 4, which is 8. I can times all the things on the bottom. 2 times 1 times 3 is 6. And then just check if your fraction simplifies, as 2 is a common factor for both of these. 8 divided by 2 is 4, and 6 divided by 2 is 3, so 4/3. So that concludes the pretest, just those two objectives. The first one being to translate algebraic and verbal expressions. Make sure you know those key words, because they're obviously going to be very important for you. And then the second one is simplifying expressions, either by just using GEMDAS, or as we did on the last one, using replacement values by substitution.